Hello, and welcome back to Storyfile, where we discuss all things stories, including books, movies, TV shows, and games. Today, I'm going to be talking about the Avatar: The Last Airbender comics. These are the big stories, the ones that are 3 volumes that all make up the same kind of big story. I will be talking about the one-shots and the compilations and the novels and all of those other Avatar stories in a different video. So today, we're just going to be going over the 6 big 3-volume stories in the Avatar: The Last Airbender, the first series, not the Legend of Korra ones. So these include The Promise, The Search, The Rift, Smoke and Shadow, North and South, and Imbalance. So the first 3 of these, The Promise, The Search, and The Rift, I read as physical copies, the omnibus editions that are slowly being released. My 4th one should be coming in soon, but I don't have it just yet. The other 2 are not in yet. So number 4, 5, and 6, Smoke and Shadow, North and South, and Imbalance, I read as ebooks. So that may influence a little bit of my reading experience, but I was very grateful to have been able to read all of them. So first I'm just going to go over the kind of main premise of each one, spoiler free, and kind of give my pros and cons for each, as well as my rating out of 5, and then I will conclude with ranking them how I believe the worst to best is. So starting with number 1, The Promise. The Promise picks up literally seconds after the end of the original TV show, and this one deals with the conflict surrounding the Fire Nation colonies. So basically there are Fire Nation citizens living in Earth Kingdom territory, and Zuko and Aang and the Earth King kind of have to decide what to do about those people. Do they need to be relocated back to the Fire Nation so the Fire Nation will stop, colonizing everybody else, or do we leave them there because that's their livelihood? So I think it's a really interesting kind of like political look about the after effects of the war. So I really enjoyed this one. I liked the plot in general. I liked the idea of consequences, where it wasn't just like the end of the show, everything is all wrapped up and everybody's happy. Like, no, there are actual real world consequences we have to deal with. I enjoyed getting to see a new area of the world. We hadn't been to the Fire Nation colonies before, I don't think. So that was pretty cool. My biggest complaint about this book is the characters, and you're going to see that this comes up in every one of these I'm going to talk about. The character work is not super great in any of the comics. There are a lot of great things that I really enjoyed, all of them. But one of the biggest strengths of the Avatar TV show is the characters. It has some of the most memorable, well-rounded, well-developed characters I've ever seen in any kind of stories of any medium. And there's just certain, they're not the same in any of the comics. So this one, my biggest complaint is Zuko and Aang. Those 2 characters especially seem to act really out of character from what we kind of knew about the show. And then some of the other characters like Katara and Sokka, they just didn't really have much to do. And again, that's going to be a complaint I'll have about many of the other comics, is that the characters who aren't like the main characters don't really have a whole lot to do, so they're just kind of filler. That makes me sad, because definitely in the show, not every episode, but in most of the episodes, all of the characters were important to the plot, and all of them had some sort of role and development. Again, not every episode, but most of them. So again, the plot I really enjoyed about this one. I also really liked the world building and kind of the lore that is added to the story we already love. So I gave The Promise a 4.5 out of 5. Oh, I think it's one of the better comics. I definitely recommend for any hardcore Avatar fans. The next one is The Search. This one is probably the most anticipated of all the comics, because this is the one where Zuko goes and looks for his mom. So if you remember in the original show, one of the last lines of the show is Zuko asking his father, "Where is my mother?" And it seems to me that was supposed to be a storyline that like was going to be in season 4 and then never happened. So this one definitely I think is the one that most Avatar fans will be most interested in, because it's the one that answers a very explicit question stated in the show. So I think the premise of this one is great. Zuko and Azula, it was cool to see her come back. Zuko and Azula go to search for their mother. So again, biggest strength of this one, I think, is the world building. There's a really interesting set of characters again from the spirit world that are established that I really enjoyed. I really liked the more spiritual aspect of the comic. That wasn't explored a whole lot in the original series, so I enjoyed getting to see more of that. There was also a lot of really emotional scenes in this one between Zuko and Azula and their mother, and there are a lot of cool flashbacks that started to add more depth to the characters of Ursa and Ozai and even the kids. So I really enjoyed a lot of like the emotional beats the story was going for. I'm also a complete sucker for flashbacks. So anytime there are flashbacks used even remotely effectively in a story, I love them, especially in a visual medium like comic books. My biggest complaint about this one, again, is the characters. The characters are they just act so weird in these. So again, Zuko, and I don't want to spoil, the way Zuko treats Azula, I don't love in this comic. Hello, Simba. And then, this is kind of a complaint for the first one too, Katara and Aang are now together. Like, we know that they like get together at the end of Avatar, and then if you've seen The Legend of Korra, you know that they stay together. I'll bring my cat over here. So, they are together in these comics, which is fine, but they just act so weird. They call each other sweetie, which just, there's nothing wrong with that word. It's just really kind of nauseating hearing them say that instead of each other's names. It's just awkward. And then I feel like Katara kind of gets relegated to the love interest character instead of being the really well-developed character she was in Avatar. So I did not love Katara in any of these, the North and South. We'll get to that in a minute. So again, the character is just kind of off for me, but again, the plot is great, the world building is great, the artwork is fantastic. I didn't mention the artwork in The Promise. The artwork and all of these is fantastic. My other complaint about The Search is, and I don't want to spoil, but there's a certain plot element that's introduced pretty early in the story that is supposed to be really important, but it's really hard to believe that that would actually be a thing. So then when it's revealed the truth about said plot element later, it's really like a letdown. It's really unsatisfying. So I did not love that. That's probably the biggest thing that brought this one down for me. So The Search, I really enjoyed seeing Zuko and Azula again and all the world building that was added. Some of the rest of the gang doesn't really have a whole lot to do other than Zuko and Azula, so I didn't love that. But I did give The Search 4.5 out of 5 as well. So Promise and The Search I both rated the same. The third comic is The Rift, and this one follows mostly Toph, which was cool because I think Toph was in The Promise, but not much, and then she wasn't in The Search at all. So I appreciated seeing her come back. She was always really enjoyable. She's not my favorite character, that's Zuko, but I did enjoy all of the times that Toph was in the original show. All of her scenes I thought were a lot of fun, and she's definitely one of the best benders in the world, so all of the scenes she's in are really cool. So in this story, basically the premise is Aang goes back to this area that used to be sacred to his culture, to the air nomads, because he wants to try to connect with the previous air nomad avatar Yang Chen. But he finds that there has been a factory that is built over the sacred land. So we get into a whole lot of issues of like technology versus nature, which is a subject I always like reading about in stories. So this was kind of prime for me. I also really liked seeing Yang Chen because we only saw her for like, I don't know, 5 seconds in the original show. And I thought it was pretty cool getting to see the world during her time. So lots of good flashback sequences with her. We also get a lot more of the spirit world here with different spirits. I don't remember what their names are, but the spirits who used to kind of like preside over the area that the story takes place in. So pros about The Rift, I liked the theme. It was not just easily resolved on like technology or nature is better. They kind of had to reach this understanding, which I appreciated. Toph was excellent in this comic. She was definitely the strongest character. She had some really, really cool scenes. So I definitely loved seeing her again. Again, Yang Chen was awesome. I loved seeing the world when she was the Avatar look very different from when Aang is the Avatar. And then again, as I said with the previous two, I enjoyed the history and the lore that were added in this this graphic novel. The cons, this is a con for pretty much all the comics. There are new characters that are introduced in each of the comics, and I don't know if it's just because they're in comics and they're not in like the show, so we kind of get to know them in a different way, but I don't really love any of the new characters in any of the comics, but especially this one. There's like a new guy introduced who is, I think he's like in charge of the factory, or at least he's like overseeing, like the manager, overseeing daily operations, and he kind of has like a romantic thing with Toph, and it just does not feel natural at all. It feels super weird, and I did not like any scenes that he was in. He was fine, like I didn't hate him, but it just felt super forced. So kind of with all of the comics, there are new characters introduced in each one. I don't remember any of their names. I don't think any of them are particularly interesting. I really just kind of wanted to see more of the original characters, which kind of makes me sad because I am all for introducing new characters in the same world. I mean, that's like one of the reasons I write fan fiction, but I just did not love any of the ones that were introduced in the comics. The next thing I did not like about this one, this is totally personal preference, Zuko is not in this comic at all, which is fine. Like, there is nothing inherently wrong with that. Zuko is in other comics, and this one is focused in a different area, and Zuko's doing other stuff, but it did make me sad because in the original show, Zuko and Iroh are like the kind of the heart of the show, and then missing, to me, kind of takes out a bit of that. And then my final con with this one, Toph and Aang, they do not get along at all in this one, and the thing that they're fighting about, I think, is fine. I think it's good that we have characters who are friends but still disagree on things, but the way that they act toward each other in this comic really bothers me, especially Toph. Kind of her thing is she's on the side of like technology and advancing the world, and Aang is of course on the side of the air nomads and the nature and tradition, and Toph just seems very disrespectful and rude to Aang in pretty much the whole story. And I know that's kind of more her personality, but I did not love that, because we know from the comic how much Aang has suffered already, losing his people and his culture, and she just seemed to really write that off. And I know she's like, I mean, she's a kid, she has like things she needs to mature about, but I don't know, I just did not really, any of the scenes that they shared together just made me I didn't love them. But I did end up rating the Rift 4.5 out of 5 as well. So the first 3 comics, all very solid, 4.5 out of 5. Honestly, if you just read these 3, I think you would be fine. I did enjoy the other 3 as well, but these 3 are my top 3, spoiler. So I think these 3 are the best ones. The 4th comic in this series is Smoke and Shadow. So now we go back to the Fire Nation. And this one follows Zuko as the Fire Lord. He is bringing his mother back from where she was living in the Search. He's bringing his mother back to the Fire Nation and discovers that there's this group of people called the New Ozai Society who are trying to rise up and overthrow Zuko and put Ozai back on the throne. So that's kind of the main conflict, and then the like side conflict is that there are these spirits whose names I can't pronounce who are coming and stealing children from their beds. So, I mean, probably these 2 things are connected. You have a group of people who are trying to overthrow Zuko, and you have children mysteriously disappearing. What's Zuko going to do about this? This is like a huge problem. So I enjoyed the plot of this one. I thought it was really interesting and very logical. I mean, Ozai made incredible advancements during his reign as the Fire Lord. Obviously not in ethical ways, so obviously not in good ways, but it makes sense that there would be people who miss kind of being the world dominating power, because presumably Zuko would not be leading the world like that. So I think that was definitely like a logical progression of the story. I also really liked May coming back. She wasn't in the original series too much, and I don't think she's been in any of the comics so far. So she was a pretty big part of this comic, which I thought was fun. We got to see more of her like family dynamics that she hinted at in the original show, and so I liked seeing her back. She's always fun. This story also kind of seemed like a mystery, and I love mysteries. It's one of my favorite genres of stories. So this one kind of followed like the mystery beats of a mystery plot, which I appreciated because we hadn't had that before and thought that was something kind of new. And then finally, my other pro about this one is Ursa herself. She was, I mean, emotionally and probably physically abused when she was living at the Fire Nation with Ozai back in the past before she left, and we got to see her deal with her trauma and coming back to this place that she has all these horrible memories of. So I thought the way that that was handled was really, really well done. So I enjoyed all of the scenes with Ursa. Now on to the cons. So I mentioned Mei was back. Mei is not with Zuko. They broke up in, I think, The Promise. I'm not entirely sure which comic, but I think it was The Promise. They broke up. And so now Mei is seeing this other guy. And as I mentioned for The Rift, I don't really love any of the new characters. So when Mei is with this other guy, it just makes me want to throw up. Like, it's so unnatural. There's nothing wrong with this guy, but it's just so weird. And so, of course, she's with this new guy. So, of course, we have to introduce a love triangle in this book. So we have Mei and her new boyfriend and Zuko. And I'm just like, why would you do my boy Zuko dirty by putting him in a love triangle? Like, just why? I hate love triangles. And the fact that you put Zuko in a love triangle is just heinous. So I did not appreciate any of that aspect of the story. Like, just could be removed. Do not like. Again, the gang does pretty much nothing in the story. So any of the stories, like The Search and Smoke and Shadow, both center on Zuko. And when Zuko is the main character, apparently nobody else needs anything to do. So I didn't really love anybody else in this. Aang, Katara, Sokka, I don't remember if Toph's in it. But any of those people, like, they didn't really have anything to do. It's like, we don't need them. This is Zuko's story. So I think the balance of the main character voice versus, like, the supporting characters in these books definitely could be improved. And then the final thing I did not like, and I don't want to spoil this one, but there is, when, like, the little kids that have been kidnapped, when they're finally found, there's a pretty obvious Deus Ex Machina that is used to advance the plot. Like, one of the characters suddenly knows how to do something that is able to save everybody. If you've read it, you know what I'm talking about. And I don't know, some people like that. I didn't love that. I felt like it kind of came out of nowhere. It was a little bit forced. So if it had been kind of alluded to earlier, maybe it was. I read this one kind of quickly, but I don't remember it being alluded to at all. It just kind of popped up, and it was like, oh, this character can do this now, cool. So it was a cool scene, but it just wasn't really set up well, in my opinion. So I gave Smoke and Shadow a 4 out of 5, so still a really solid read, still enjoyable, had lots of good moments in it, but just those three things, the love triangle, the gang, and then that Deus Ex Machina, those three things kind of pulled it back behind the other three for me. So now let's talk about North and South. This is number 5 in this series. North and South, we actually go back to the Southern Water Tribe, and we are focused mainly on Katara and Sokka, which I appreciated because they have pretty much had nothing to do in any of these comics. They've all been kind of minor characters and haven't really done a whole lot. Now I have Mufasa here. So North and South takes place in the Southern Water Tribe. Katara and Sokka go back to their home that they haven't been to since, I think, like the second episode of the show. So that was cool, seeing a place we haven't been to in a long time. And they find that it has been extremely modernized and industrialized. It looks a lot like the Northern Water Tribe now, and it's not like the little bitty villages. It's like a big, huge city. So I think that was cool, getting to see that again. The main conflict centers around kind of like the Rift, progression versus tradition. So there are these people from the Northern Water Tribe who are there trying to help the Southern Water Tribe advance in their civilization. And then there's a certain group of people in the Southern Water Tribe who don't want them there, and they want to keep things as they've been and retain their Southern culture instead of, like, conforming to the Northern culture. So I think the concept of this one was really interesting, because it dealt with kind of more like colonialism, like we dealt with the Fire Nation. So it's like, what is civilization mean? Is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? How much of our, like, individual culture should be retained when we're trying to, like, modernize? So I think the themes and the plot were good in this one. The downside is that I think this one was just too similar to the Rift, and I think the Rift was better. Like, they had similar ideas. They took place in different places, but they had similar ideas, and I think the Rift just handled the themes a little bit better. Pros, Katara and Sokka finally having something to do. Katara in this comic was awesome. She did so many cool waterbending moves. She like made this sled out of ice. She had so many cool moves. I love watching waterbending, especially Katara, and it was very cool getting to see her use her bending in really creative ways in this comic. So I liked that. I liked getting to go back to the Southern Water Tribe since we hadn't seen it in a long time. That was cool. And I did really like the gang in this one. Of the 6 comics, this one I think probably handled all of the characters having something to do the best. I think this one, like mainly about Katara and Sokka, but Aang, Toph, and even Zuko do have actual important roles in the story that seem to make logical sense, unlike some of the other ones. So I did appreciate that. The downsides, again, the characters. The new characters I just didn't like. Again, I don't remember any of their names. I did the people from the Northern Water Tribe, the like rebellious Southern Water Tribe people. I just didn't really like any of them. I didn't really care what happened to any of them at all. I didn't think they were really well-rounded enough to be like real people that I would actually get invested in. And then again, as I said, I think it's a little too similar to the Rift. So this one I did give a 4 out of 5 because there were a lot of really solid elements. But I'll go ahead and like just preface with, I think this one is the weakest of the comics. It was my least favorite just because I don't think it really added anything to the world. We got to see the new Southern Water Tribe, what it looks like, but that could have just been like a flyby. We see it, we stop for one day or whatever. I didn't really like, it didn't really seem to add anything of substance. This one felt the most like filler to me, but it was still enjoyable to read. The artwork, of course, as always, is fantastic. And then the 6th one is Imbalance. This one's a little bit jarring to read just because the art style is completely different. They got a new artist to do this one, so it's really good art. It's just, it looks really different from the other 5, so if you've like been reading them all in order, then it's like, whoa. But it still is really good. So I really liked Imbalance because it sets up Legend of Korra really well. And Legend of Korra I do not love nearly as much as I love Avatar, but I did really like season 1 of The Legend of Korra. Amon is one of my favorite villains from the entire series, both series. So this one really deals with the conflict between benders and non-benders. And if you've seen Legend of Korra, you know season 1 deals with the non-benders trying to equalize the benders and make everybody equal and on the same playing field because they see the benders as a threat and like overly powerful. This one's kind of the opposite. This one, the benders are trying to drive the non-benders out of the city because the factories owned by the non-benders are now using machinery to kind of replace the benders. And I liked this because this is something that really happens in the real world, like people losing their jobs because machines can do it quicker, more efficiently, and cheaper. So it's a similar kind of thing we saw. So instead of having earthbenders work in the factory, instead of having to like pay them and employ them, now you just use machines and it's a lot quicker and cheaper. So I like that. So the benders are not happy about being replaced and they want to boot all of the non-benders out of the city. So I really liked the main conflict of this one, the plot. It was just something that I enjoyed reading about, and again, I think set up Legend of Korra really well because now you see why the non-benders want to equalize the benders because of the way that they've been treated in the time of this comic. Another thing I really liked in Imbalance was the concept of identity. So there's a couple of really good conversations, especially with Katara talking about bending not just as an ability but part of your identity, because there's a point where Aang is considering taking somebody's bending away, like he did for Ozai in the Avatar show, and Katara talks about how it's more non-violent than like killing somebody, but is still very traumatizing because you are literally taking a part of themselves. And I think we got to see a lot of that in Legend of Korra when Amon started taking people's bending away. We got to see some of the trauma that came from that, be it from Korra or from some of the other characters. So I really liked that conversation. I think it was set up very smoothly. Another thing I really liked about Imbalance was Suki. I think Suki was in like couple of the other comics for a couple pages, but she really had a lot to do with this one. She was really important. She's now really good at chi blocking. She learned from Ty Lee because Ty Lee trained all the Kyoshi warriors, and Suki starts training more of the non-benders to become chi blockers so that they actually have like a useful ability that they can use to fight against the Benders, who are, trying to throw them out of the city. So I thought that was really cool. It made very logical sense to me that Suki would be a teacher because she was the leader of the Kyoshi warriors and she was training Sokka, and it just seemed like she'd be a logical person to train other people. So that seemed like a very natural progression for her character to me, as opposed to somebody like Toph. I didn't really talk about, but Toph has like a metal bending academy now. She's teaching people how to metal bend. That makes sense because you have all these metal benders in Legend of Korra, and it's like, how'd they learn? But I don't know, Toph doesn't seem like she'd be a good teacher to me. Suki, that definitely seems like a good point for her character. Cons of Imbalance, not that many. This one, my biggest issue with is I think it's the last comic. Like, I don't know if there's going to be another one as of right now, as of filming of this video. There's not another one after this. Like, the next thing is Legend of Korra, which is like, I don't know, 60, 70 years after this comic. And a lot of the characters who don't show up in Korra don't get any sort of resolution. So we know from Legend of Korra that, like, Katara, Zuko, Toph, they're still alive. They're old, but they're still alive. We know that Aang obviously has passed because Korra is the new Avatar, so we know about that. But we, like, never see what happens to Sokka, Suki, or Azula. And the fact that this is the end of the comics, it's just like, oh, well, like, there's no... Do Sokka and Suki get married? Do they have any kids? Does Azula come back to the Fire Nation? Like, we don't know anything about these characters, so that's kind of my biggest complaint with this one. And again, if there's going to be another comic then that actually answers these questions, then I would probably rate it higher. But that was the biggest thing for me. It was just like, oh, that's the end. And it didn't seem to, like, end. It didn't seem like an end to any of these characters. The other con for Imbalance was it was a bit heavy-handed. I really liked the themes it was going for, but it was pretty explicit. I think Avatar, the show in general, did a better job about not saying, like, this is bad and this is good. And kind of all the comics were weaker in that regard, but especially this one. It was pretty, like, this is the theme, which I didn't love. On the one side, like, this is for kids, so maybe we need to say it, but on the other hand, like, kids are intelligent and they can figure things out, so I didn't think it needed to be quite as explicit. So this video has been way longer than I planned it being, but I did really enjoy all of the Avatar comics. Imbalance, I gave a 4 out of 5. I don't think I said that. I did really enjoy all of them. I loved getting to spend more time in this world and build up the lore and the history, and just getting to spend more time with the characters was a lot of fun. The art was fantastic. I was a little bit worried because bending is, like, my favorite thing to watch in the Avatar show. It's super well animated and cool with the martial arts integration, and I think that was carried over really, really well into the comics. So I do recommend them for anybody who's a hardcore Avatar fan. They're not a necessity, definitely, but if you really just want to see more of the world and kind of some of the after effects of the war, I would recommend them. They're enjoyable reads and they're a lot of fun. So now on to my ranking. I'm going to go from my least favorite to my favorite. As you know from earlier, I rated 3 of these 4.5 and 3 of them 4, so, like, they're all pretty comparable, but in order of personal preference, number 6, North and South. As I stated before, this one is my least favorite. It kind of feels more like filler than really adding much to the established timeline of Avatar. Number 5, I put Imbalance. Again, I think this one would move up if there's another comic that comes later, but just the lack of resolution for a lot of characters really brought this one down for me. Number 4, Smoke and Shadow. I really enjoyed the main plot of Smoke and Shadow, but the love triangle plus the lack of other characters doing anything of importance drives this one down a bit for me. So those are my bottom 3, North and South, Imbalance, Smoke and Shadow. Now up to the top 3. Number 3, The Promise. That's the one that comes right after the show. This one I really, really loved. Literally the only thing holding this one back for me is just how out of character Zuko and Aang act. When you read it, you'll know what I'm talking about. That one, I can't put it higher because of that one thing. Number 2, The Rift. I enjoyed The Rift a lot more than I thought it was going in, since it was just like an industrial world instead of focused entirely on bending. But I really liked pretty much the whole thing. I didn't really have a lot of complaints about The Rift, so really liked that one. And then, of course, number 1, The Search. I feel like that's everybody's favorite. It's the most logical logical progression of the series into the comics, because it's the story that needed to be told. It's a story the fans were asking for. So largely because of nostalgia, but I also just think it added the most because we got a definitive answer on what happened to Ursa and does Zuko ever see her again, and I think that was really satisfying. So those are my ratings and my rankings of the 6 main Avatar comics. Another video, I will do the Korra comics, which I haven't read yet, the current 3 one-shots for the ladies in the Avatar universe, as well as the compilations, Lost Adventures and Team Avatar Tales, and the Kyoshi novels, which I haven't finished reading. So all of those I will talk about in other videos, but I didn't really feel like it was fair to compare apples and oranges, so I just did these 6 main ones. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope it was helpful for you. What was I say again? Hope it was helpful in deciding what you would like to read and what kinds of things to look out for as you're going in. So that wraps up today, and I will see you next time. Bye.